Welcome to the Hibbing Economic Development Authority regular meeting agenda. Today is October 21st, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We do have everyone in attendance tonight with the exception of member Mike Egan. Additions, deletions, approval of the agenda. Can we get a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
I'll make a motion, Madam Chair.
Motion made by Mayor Hyduk.
Support.
Supported by member Schweiberger. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Approval of the minutes. Approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Hibbing Economic Development Authority for September 16th, 2024. Can we get a motion for this?
Madam President, I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion made by member Hoffman-Sokoman,
Support.
supported by Vice President Drainus. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. On to the consent agenda. Number 1, affirm the Economic Development Loan Fund as of September 30th, 2024 in the amount of $1,212,607.77. Number 2, approve the disbursements for the month of September in the amount of $307,206.12. Number 3, set the next regular meeting of Heda for Monday, November 18th, 2024 at 5 p.m. in the Hibbing City Hall Council Chamber. 4, set the next Heda working session for Monday, November 18th, 2024, following the regular meeting in the Hibbing City Council Hall Chamber. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion, Madam Chair, to accept the agenda.
Motion made
Consent
by
agenda.
Mayor Hyduk,
Support.
supported by member Schweiberger. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, presentations. Betsy.
So the first presentation tonight is the AMGS project update, and we have John Maxwell here from Bar Engineering, who is our owner's rep, and will be presenting the update tonight. And in your packet, you will have both the presentation and the master project budget as we're tracking towards this project.
Hi everyone, I guess I stand before you as your owner's representative on this project. I did get on Todd's case last week that he's supposed to be presenting these, and I know it's been 2 months in a row, and he promised that he would, even though he's putting these together for us, he would be here to present these in the future. So you will see, your contractor involved as well. Have the screen, yeah. So we'll start off a little bit on safety. Contractor likes to put safety first, and they are actively taking a safety approach. You can see the bullet points there that they're taking at site. But the big thing is there's no injuries so far, and we're going to try to continue that through the project. I don't know if I need to read each one of those to you, but again, taking a proactive approach, at the site here. Safe work environment. Some schedule bullet points. Concrete's nearing completion. We have quite a bit of concrete in the ground. I'm not sure if you guys have had a chance to get over to the site there, but foundations are in, walls are in. I think they were half in last week, and the pre-engineered metal building was delivered last Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So building's unloaded. We are waiting for the foundations and the piers to meet strength requirements before they start setting the building, and they're anticipating that to happen November 4th there. That's where they're at on construction. A little bit back here. You can't really see that schedule, but they are actively, planning to start construction of the building in November. It is on site. They are working on waterproofing the walls prior to backfilling to try to expedite that. Everything else is pretty much on track as planned. No major hiccups in the schedule there. If you could see that in a little more detail, they're tracking, the red indicates, the critical path items. Much of that isn't the building, is not the concrete right now. That's the lead time of some of the long lead items forward. So that's still, kind of controlling those end dates. Some of the, I believe it's the electrical still showing up as the red critical path items. So I guess maybe for more of your viewing pleasure, if you haven't been to site, we've got some photos here. So job trailer, signage is out on the road, foundations going in, the hot tap with the city water, what else, building, delivery, storage. Lastly here, City of Hibbing has granted conditional approval to move forward. We are still waiting on the building permit. Betsy and I have been working with Pat Green to try to coordinate some of the items that he might need in his review of that. One thing I would say, he has been very cooperative with getting to site. He has been doing all the inspections as these conditional approval items have been going forward. So everything has been getting inspected through this process. Just kind of dotting all the i's, crossing the t's on that.
John, I did get an update from Pat Green today. He said the DOLI came through on October 3rd for plumbing only. They have a verbal for all underground work. He just received the actual building plans on October 11th on the new core steel building and is working to renew that, or review it. He needs the energy code compliance forms completed. He needs the lighting compliance forms completed. He needs the alarm plans and review for compliance, and then he has questions for the architects that he still has not sent to them as he goes through that review process. So there's a couple of things that this section on that architecture questions, it's like waterproofing, insulation, and the vapor barrier or something. So I'll give this to you, but that was his update right before the meeting tonight. So
Okay.
John and I have been trying to bird dog both of those things together, so I think it's still on track, needless to say.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a communication blip there. Contractor can't provide what they don't know they need to provide at this point. Been a little bit of back and forth. We'll get it taken care of, and Pat has been doing all the inspections at the site, so there hasn't been any hiccups with the construction aspect of it. A little bit of a budget update. A very small portion of that big pie has been spent so far. Mostly that has been the earthwork at the property. Like I said, the foundations are in, but I do not believe that's in the current billing period that we're shown in the green.
John, so you said all the footings and foundation is in now?
All of the footings are in. I believe over half of the walls were in, and the rest of the walls were getting poured last week.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a 3-week pour schedule, so
Correct.
we're
So
almost through it, but
We're
not quite.
almost done with concrete, but we're not quite done with it.
Can't beat this weather.
Oh, man, they've had zero impact with weather so far, so that should be that benefiting the project quite a bit.
And then right behind this is the master project budget, so you can see that the deed grant from the 21st Century Mineral Fund for the $300,000 came through on October 3rd as well. And that paperwork got signed and sent off. I'm working with Finance Department right now on getting appropriate invoices to them to, get that funds flow. And then tonight in your packet, you have the limited recourse loan and those other pieces to make sure that we can continue on the schedule of bills as planned.
Okay.
That's
Anybody
all
have
I-
any other questions?
I don't.
Right?
Good?
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yep, have a great rest of your day. Perfect. All right. Second presentation that I have for you tonight is the Jefferson School Project Update, and we have Kirk Davis here from New History. While he's approaching the podium, I have his presentation up there as well. Kirk has been working on this project since the start, and tonight, what we're looking for, we're gonna have the presentation during the regular portion of the meeting, and then we'll have some workshop discussion around this to see sort of what the general consensus of the board is as far as moving forward on next steps. So, Kirk, if I'll turn that over to you, and you can go ahead and start.
Thanks, Betsy. Good evening, everyone. I am Kirk Davis with New History. We are a small company of architects, engineers, planners, and historians. We focus in historic building reuse, sometimes just old building reuse if we don't call it historic. And we are a multidiscipline team that does everything from initial assessment of buildings to research to getting buildings on the National Register, all the way to very specific, construction details of how building reuse can happen. So we're often tasked with a first look at a building and looking at a feasibility study, which is where we started here. And then just to mention, I am the engineer on the team, so my background is in structural engineering, been in many, many buildings and figuring out how well they're put together or remaining together and doing condition assessments of existing buildings. So that's where we started on this one. Just to kind of outline, our goal in working with Betsy and with you all is just to assess the viability of specifically multifamily housing and maybe some community uses at this site, including just an adaptive reuse of the existing building. So that's kind of what we're after. Specifically housing because as you all know, and we'll get to later with some of the recent studies and the need for housing. So we're coming to this project with a basic question of, can this building be used for housing? And our hypothesis, which was where we started and remains, is that the building and site could be reused to accommodate housing community needs. We'll get into the detail of that. We also have our final report, which is pending and will come in mid-November. So this is still active, and we're kind of sharing our initial findings here. But definitely see a path to reuse and can inform what that might look like. So for tonight, I want to just present our findings in general and maybe some reuse options that we can think about. And then as Betsy mentioned, the next step would be to kind of find a consensus on the next steps. Looking further into more specifics, coming up with, we'll look at a couple next steps at the last slide here that we're able to offer, and some that are by third party. So I think everybody's probably familiar, but off of Diane Lane, which is also off of Grade Drive, and this original school location, the school was there until 2003. And we, in most of our reporting and in the report that you'll see, we call it an A wing and a B wing, which is basically your kind of main bar on the top. East-west orientation is your A wing, B wing being the part that extends to the south off of the east end. This just comes from the original drawings that we were lucky enough to find. So A wing and B wing, and there are some differences in how those two are constructed. But that's basic location. Any questions on the location or the site? Moving to just kind of where we started and kind of the info that we knew going in. We knew that the construction date was around 1958, 59 from permit records. We did know there was some reinforced concrete and steel. We understand that it's privately owned right now by Sunrise Bakery, who is owning and operating out of it. Historically, we know prior to 2003 that it was used as a school. So no kind of interim use between what you see today and the original. There's childcare in the B wing, the very south end of the B wing. And then a lot of the building is actually vacant. A lot of it is underused. Now, the existing or the current owner is heating and conditioning all the space. So they're using maybe under half of what's there for square footage. But going through the winters, keeping it heated, which is key when it comes to condition. I think that's what's kept it in pretty good shape. It is not currently historically designated, and that goes for both local and national. So there is no designation that's been pinned on it so far. And coming into it, we do understand that just kind of the climate of what the owner would like is they are kind of, in their words, done with the building and wanting to move on from it, wanting an answer by the end of the year. So I'll break just quickly in 4 pieces, kind of what we have done so far. And that is documentation review. We looked at, with Betsy's help, what documentation is there so that we can start at the right point. And then the second was condition assessment. Myself and our licensed architect walked through the building with the owners, looking pretty much able to see every corner of the building, not quite every classroom, but definitely representative of that bank. And the anomalies, certainly where is your roof leaking, for instance. So finding personnel that is in the building right now and asking them to kind of show us points of interest. The third part was evaluating it for the National Register of Historic Places, which I can give you an update on. And then finally, what are kind of our reuse options as we're shaking them out right now. And that's not just what do we use the building for, as in like, is it housing or is it a bakery, but also the ownership options of that. You know, does it make sense to be public or privately owned? So the documentation review, I won't go through every one, but the biggest one is that we did find 1958 drawings and get those scanned in, which from an architect and engineering standpoint, that's how we understand the building. Between that and walking the building, I think we have a really good idea of how this is put together. There's also a lot of adjacent studies, but the one highlighted here is the comp plan for housing, and keeping that in mind when we're thinking about potential use, how might the mix look if we try to put housing in this building. I guess another one I'll call attention to is the memo of understanding that basically we have, you know, a 6-month period where we are a 6-month period where we are basically we have rights, or excuse me, the Hibbing EDA has rights to purchase the building, and the existing owner will not sell to anybody else. The key findings, and I realize this is getting a little small on the screens, so maybe you have some printouts, but just kind of takeaways from each one of those. The memo of understanding, as I just mentioned, is just a 6-month agreement that does expire end of January, so we're about halfway through that. The building can be, the potential for this property to be housing is kind of the target of the whole memo. In other words, we're not looking at broadly any other use, but that definitely is why we have the agreement. We do need, you know, to move past that memo, some scope and cost information. And Betsy and I, we've had a lot of conversations about how do we attract a developer, what questions will a developer ask. Betsy's been touring a couple developers through there. Specifically to the strategic planning initiative, goal 2 and goal 5, finding quality housing stock that is affordable and accessible. This fits the bill because it actually is a really flat site. You're not talking about a 3- and 4-story with many different levels. So it is, it's generally accessible. There is a little bit of grade in there, and we would need an improvement in elevator, but pretty minor when it comes to that compared to other buildings. And then a safe place, I mean, definitely the setting is in residential already with some buffer zone around. I think you all probably know well just the need for housing, and so we're specifically looking at market rate and empty nesters, retirees. We know that you know, there's not enough lots, and so that is something that we could. Our focus generally so far has been on the building. There is, you know, definitely more land than the building footprint, and maybe there's some opportunity there, but our focus so far is what can we do with the building. Knowing that new construction is very hard to pencil out right now, can we get something to work with the existing? And then a key thing to point out, just the zoning as of now, the planned development does not include housing, so that's something we would need to modify. So I'll just go high level, kind of what does an engineer and architect see when we were out there? You know, water infiltration maybe should be the first bullet point there, and that's definitely the first thing that you notice or is called to your attention. The roof is leaking. Now, we've been in many buildings, many where there's hardly a roof at all, and it's definitely important. It's, you know, you start losing a building if you don't have a roof. I think we're still in the very beginning stage of a failing roof. In other words, we're getting water in, but the water has not wreaked havoc like some other properties that we've looked at. Yeah. So the short, you know, The current owner definitely did do his best to try to battle that water from coming in and has fixed a few spots. I think there's still a couple spots that aren't quite tight. But in short, there's water that has been let in. I would say it actually looks probably worse than it is as far as what that water has done so far. There's definitely staining and surface damage. You see things like surface rust. Looks like the whole thing's rusted, but it's kind of at the beginning of what water can do. And it's otherwise really in pretty sound condition. The structural integrity, this is a pretty robust building. I'm going to go back to this here. The A wing is actually just one story on grade, much like the construction we were just seeing the presentation before. Slab on grade and steel structure above, so steel bar joists and single level, masonry exterior. The B wing down in the southeast is actually a more robust reinforced concrete, so it's really kind of a brick house down there, masonry exterior, but a pretty darn robust two-story structure down there. And all of that, from where we can see it and from the symptoms or the finishes, which is where we look when we can't actually see the structure, there's really no indications of, the big thing is global settlement of the structure. There's nothing suggesting that the ground's moving underneath. So there is some water damage, but that hasn't really affected the structural integrity of the building yet. Like I mentioned, accessibility would need an improvement. The hazardous materials is something we're working through right now. There actually was a further study, but we have not been able to track that down. So there remains, some potential that there's asbestos-containing materials or lead-based paint. Pretty much any building of this era will have something that does contain, but it's kind of like how big of an issue is it to mitigate those? And would a reuse project be uncovering those, or can they kind of be kept dormant? The windows in general are not original, which actually works well. I mean, they're not brand new, but if we had original windows on this, it would probably be single pane, and they would be giving away even more energy when you're trying to heat it in the winter. The majority of the original finishes actually remain, and that's part of maybe the appeal, is there's the glazed tile in the interior that's all still colored. A lot of what was there originally is there today. There's, photos like the one there where you see the staining on the floor is definitely the exception. And it tends to happen when we put together condition reports is like, where do we see things going wrong? And then you end up with a bunch of pictures of things going wrong. But there's just as many pictures we can take, or more pictures that we can take of the structure in really good condition. The vestibules are just more specifically looking at the entries. We're calling those fair rather than good. There is some, they're getting a little tired where the doors and the seals and things on the entrances themselves. I'll stop there just to see if there's any questions on condition.
How's the mechanical?
Mechanical is, what I'll say is it's a good candidate for replacing mechanical. And basically any building that we look at, which is 50s, 60s, 70s, or older, needs a complete upgrade in mechanical. There's just, there's older boilers in this building. What it does have, though, is it has a really good distribution system. There's actually tunnels under the perimeter of these. Under both perimeters of the A wing and B wing, there is a tunnel underneath the slab that's completely walkable, and the pipes are all accessible. So that's a big exception to what we usually see, is being able to use that distribution system, both for air or for piping. So yes, it needs new mechanical. It's not tearing up like it usually is, tearing up into all the existing finish.
So you need new mechanical and a new roof.
Yeah.
One other note to that is there's no elevator in this building, which is why the school district discontinued the use of it, because they needed an elevator for that second floor location, or the classrooms there. At least that's what was reported to us. But there is great location to add that elevator accessibility, so.
So on that, I was wondering, when you go back and look at the documentation that was reviewed,
Yep.
And I was just wondering about this, because there's a 50-year gap there between when the ISD 701 owned it and it went to private. So when it went to private and was first sold, is there any documentation when that happened? And how the building was when it went private?
I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Okay,
We can definitely look into that.
I was just curious.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say, not that we've been able to ascertain, from our
Yeah.
investigation.
There's been very little from even permit records are,
Okay,
we haven't found much.
thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Is that oil boilers? What is the system there? It's not steam.
I believe it's hot water boiler, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, they've been really running it. And it's a difficult system right now to zone at all, so they're heating the whole school with it. So moving on to the historic, which, for a lot of reasons we asked this question, one being, there are funding sources available, and those are a little different with private and public. But is it historic is a question that is definitely worth asking for reuse. And we have historians on staff that have reviewed this, and we often distill that down to two basic things when you ask if something is eligible for the register. One is significance, the other is integrity. So is it significant enough to be recognized as historic? And then does it maintain enough of integrity to tell that story? Unfortunately for this one, the historic significance is a really hard sell. There is the Lincoln Elementary. There are just really not any one associated trends in academia, for instance, that you can pin it to. This was revolutionary, and there also are not any one person that we can pin it to that would say, obviously, Jefferson. There's dozens of Jefferson schools all over the place. And there's no name tied to its development that seems to rise to the level of significance that we would need. We do have a lot of integrity, and what we mean by that is not necessarily structural integrity or, is it in good shape and ready to turnkey, but more, does it convey the history? And, with some cleaning, this really does look a lot like what it did in 1958, 59. So we have good integrity, and a lot of times we're opposite of that. We have a lot of significance, we don't have integrity. This one, you could seek to get it on the National Register. Ultimately, that's up to the National Park Service on whether we have a compelling enough story to be significant. We're putting this at low chances. So low level of significance. We think, that, and that's actually, it provides some flexibility. There are financial incentives, particularly if you're private, getting historic tax credits. If you're public, you're looking for grants. And there are some advantages to that, but there are also constraints that come with it, with satisfying the Secretary of Interior standards for all your rehab work. So in this case, I think we're seeing it as a low level of eligibility, but seeing that doesn't, that's okay for reuse.
One note I will make is former Governor Rudy Perpich was on the school board in the city of, or in ISD 701 when this building was built. So his name's on the plaque.
Yeah. So that's historic. And then finally, just the reuse options. And this is a diagram we often use. In reuse of a building, we often circle around and try to inform all three of these. The building, the program, which is our way of saying how are you going to use it, and the funding. So just to kind of inform where we are right now as we've circled around. The building, from a very literal sense, what you have is 46,000 square feet with 22 classrooms, a cafeteria, and a gymnasium, mostly as they were when they operated as a school, but just with some bakery equipment in there. You have two tenants, the bakery as owner, and the childcare in the south wing, which is a small portion, basically half of one floor of the B wing. Market value as a placeholder is just the taxable value or the estimated market value by county, and it is zoned for planned development that doesn't yet include housing. So that's kind of basis of the building. Moving to program, we know that Hibbing has the need for housing, so we're looking at it very specifically in that lens, with the target market being empty nesters, retirees, senior, but maybe market rate as a possibility. One bedrooms is probably the most likely, and then increased childcare capacity. One thing that we've had in conversation is that the childcare right now, for one, we don't want to displace. There needs to be a solution there, and for two, there actually is a higher demand for that childcare. So is that part of the reuse or not? There also are in the open sort of spaces, gymnasium, library, those kind of areas. Is there opportunity for using that as a community or making that available to the From a funding side, direct funding by the city or the EDA, city bond, energy and program-related tax incentives. Is there any state level support? We want to look specifically at federal and state funds for cleanup when we're more informed about the hazardous materials. Obviously, there could be private equity if it goes that direction. Debt, TIF is one that we could explore, and obviously others. One to mention just with the historic is one of the initial looks was if this, had more leverage as a historic tax credit project as a private developer, that maybe we would entertain getting creative in that regard with a private developer being able to capture those credits, whereas that's something that the EDA cannot. Given that we're kind of past the historic hurdle and not finding it's a good candidate, I think that kind of goes by the wayside. So we have what we often look at for just kind of teasing out what the best option is just what are our options at a high level. And here we present three, one being do nothing, two being the city acquiring the property and then selling to a private developer, having a hand in what it becomes, or city acquisition and becoming public housing. And for many reasons, we're kind of centering in on the middle. So I won't spend a lot of time on the others, but just to mention, do nothing as obviously no action taken by the city or EDA. Current owner sells, private market kind of takes over. Future plans for the site are to be determined. City resources aren't required, but really could be any use. And unknown demand really for whether there would be an ask for public funding or an increase in the tax rate. So that would be kind of doing nothing. Doing a city acquisition, which is what we're entertaining or trying to inform as an option. City being acquire and stabilize the property, rezone to get housing in the planned development, and then secure a developer to do that handoff. That's kind of a summary of what we're entertaining. I think that probably has about a 1 year, handoff period, with the city being able to take ownership, holding it for a year while we, at least stop the leaks and inform what the developer may be able to do with it and get the zoning or the planned development taken care of.
Well, and
Go
one
ahead.
note there, Kirk, no matter what happens, unless it's operated as a bakery and a childcare, the plan development will have to be modified. Because right now, the plan development is very specific to that particular thing, and it's also very specific to just that portion of the building, correct?
I believe so, yes. Yeah, so it was very tailored to the use as a bakery and childcare.
Yeah.
So there's even a couple walls that were built specifically to, zone off that area of the building for childcare and make it work.
So no matter, any new owner will have to go through a zoning change to use it any other way.
See, you got your wild guess of dollars is
Yeah.
at 11 million and change. That's based on 300,000 per 25 units.
Yeah, we're coming at it from a couple different ways. Obviously, the best way is to, get a little further in drawing and get it bid out. But talking to some developers that are even in the region and looking at what cost per unit has been to get it to pencil out, and then also just from an overall square footage cost, just for rehab of existing building square footage, which has a high range, or a wide range, I should say. We're anywhere from $200 to $400 a square foot, or $100 to $400 a square foot. We're seeing a wide berth there. But I guess one thing to add to that is schools do lend themselves to housing in terms of it using existing walls. Every once in a while we get lucky when there is bathrooms within every classroom. In this case, in the school, that's not the case. So you'd definitely be putting in some plumbing. But overall, you've got some, pretty robust walls that divide into about 1,000 square feet in that neighborhood that is about the size of a housing unit.
Did we discuss abatement or anything like that? What does that look like? I would assume there's some asbestos.
Yeah,
in
so
that era?
we're currently chasing that because the owner did commission that work and is not able to locate the report. And so we're We're actually in contact with the contractor that did it. Our first contact with them, they also did not find it, so we may be left to redo in order to inform that.
Yep. Yep, and so those kinds of things for potential grant dollars for shovel-ready grants for this particular project, if it's privately owned, we can't go after grant funding for that. And they have to fund that, the private owner has to fund that all themselves. But if, you know, we work with somebody, then we can go after some grant funding for them to assist with that, so.
I have a question, I guess, for you guys. If we do collaborate, if we can go to the third route, aren't we running kind of the same problems that we had with the last little project at HRA? There has to be walking distance from the store, they have to have a bus service, there's none of that in that area.
So this city acquisition and HRA collaboration is not one we're pursuing. We've talked with our HRA about this.
Okay.
And right now, she just does not have capacity to take on this project. And so it's not the preferred, which is why it's orange. And the potential of a sale to a private developer is more what we're targeting. I've brought 2 developers through so far, and I have a third one that went through there with the owners themselves, and a 4th and a 5th that I'm talking to. So, you know, if we were to pursue this route by the end of this year, we would have a pre-development agreement or something in the works with a developer before the city, you know, pursues it.
Yeah, so most of the sort of yellow and orange there are natural, what if we did one of these, and informing what it would look like. And the reason we have the middle one here framed is it seems like a viable path here. Specifically, yeah, we've had a lot of talk with Jackie, and it doesn't pencil out well for her, aside from even capacity of being able to take that on.
If you slap it with a historical tag, wouldn't that make it pretty difficult to do various items also?
To do what?
If it gets a historical tag on it?
Yeah, it would make, sorry, I didn't catch the last part. It would make it hard to do what?
Would it make it more difficult to do lots of the remodeling that's going to have to be made?
Yeah, you do need to comply with the Secretary of Interior standards. So that's, I mean, what we're in the business of doing, and advising on getting those applications and those compliances in line. But the short answer is, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, for instance, to do a very large addition.
Yeah.
That impacts it.
Plus
especially
you
adding-
restrict the people that can work on it.
That generally, I think that's probably more perceived than actual. It's generally more tied to the funding source on who can work with it. The National Park Service basically has to approve the work after it's done with our photo documentation and sending them what was done. So it's nice to work with someone that has done it before and knows what they're getting into, but I can't think of a particular
It just doesn't look like a good fit for.
yeah. No, and I completely agree.
Which is why it's not recommended to go that route.
Yeah, you put the overall low likelihood.
Yep.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely.
It's cool. I mean, there's a retro feel to that thing when you walk
Oh, yeah.
into it, but it's not enough to be, you can still use that, and I don't think that historic tax credit with a private developer is a big lever to pull. And it's 20% state, 20% federal, so you're talking essentially a 40% coupon. So you can put up with some constraints, if you're a private developer to do that, but in this case, it would be a long shot.
So the full report's coming back then, mid-November. So this is just sort of a preview, and we're gonna be talking through, what you wanna do next, in the workshop tonight. But I wanted to make sure, because one of the things we're doing is transparency for all of our residents and why we're doing these things and how we're trying to pursue housing projects. That's why I had Kurt come and prepare this presentation deliver this presentation in the middle of our live stream meeting, so. Any other questions before we go on to the next item tonight? Otherwise, we'll take up the rest of this in workshop.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Kurt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sherry?
Fabulous. So the third item then that I have in front of you tonight, and this will all be covered in the agenda, we've got the AMGS lease, we've got the limited recourse loan with the IRRR, and then we've got the business subsidy agreement. So the next item is our public hearing for that business subsidy agreement. So before we go into that, I would like Andy just to run through all of the documents and things and set us up for success in that area. So Attorney Borland?
Thanks, Betsy. Madam President, members of the board. So encompassing the item number 3 in those presentations, I believe within your packet here is the limited recourse loan agreement with the IRRR and Heda. And what those documents essentially provide for is there's a loan agreement. There is a note where Heda is obligating itself for a $9 million, they're obligating itself on a $9 million loan or note to pay the IRRR. When I use the term limited recourse, though, that means that if Heda can't repay the loan, the note, because AMGS doesn't make us the rental payment, the IRRR will not be coming back after Heda for the balance on that note. What they do have the right to, though, per these documents, is to have a mortgage against the real property, and that's another of the documents that's referenced in the loan agreement. And so, if in fact things don't work out for AMGS, they could foreclose on the property and obtain that property. And by that point in time, there would be the established building on that property. So that's why it's called limited recourse versus non-recourse. Non-recourse means they wouldn't have any remedies to come back against the property at all and/or Heda. That's not what's here in front of you this evening. There is supposed to be a disbursement agreement. So as a part of the loan agreement that the IRRR put together, there was supposed to be a note, a mortgage, a disbursement agreement, a letter of opinion from the attorney, being me, saying that, yes, I believe Heda has the authority to do all of this, and you do. I've signed that agreement. They also are looking for ratifying the contract between, say, WIDSET, in this case, the architects, and Heda, as well as the Krauss-Anderson, the contract between Heda and Krauss-Anderson to build the building. And I encompass all of those in a proposed resolution this evening for your consideration. So those are generally the things that the IRRR was looking for, because they want a resolution that says, we agree with doing all of these things. The one thing that we drafted that they apparently have approved is the lease. So there, within your packet this evening is, as well, is a lease between Heda and AMGS. And it sets forth how AMGS can come in early, essentially rent-free, but for the utilities, and then commencing in 2026, they start making rental payments back to Heda. And we built into this agreement at Betsy's suggestion a management fund. I believe it's at is it $200,000 or $250,000?
$250,000.
So that Heda can manage the property during the course of this. And we specifically built it in. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, that for some reason Heda had to expend funds to maintain the property. Something went wrong and it wasn't covered by warranty, and we had to fork out money. Well, the way the lease is written is, we would then keep accepting the rental payments, and rather than give those back to the IRRR, we would refund that maintenance fee up to $200,000 again. So that's the way we wrote the lease, and the numbers that we came up with were the IRRR's numbers as to what AMGS will have to pay for lease payments. AMGS has seen the lease, they've signed the lease, they've agreed to make these payments under the terms that we set forth. So Betsy got the lease agreement that I had prepared over to the IRRR a long time ago, and they had it before they presented any documents to us. So that's kind of setting the stage. So before you go into public hearing, just a qualifier tonight, if you decide to pass this resolution. After Betsy was made aware that this wasn't a non-recourse, but a limited recourse, the question from Heda came up, well, do we really want to give away the whole parcel? The whole parcel of land there that, to AMGS? And Betsy's concern for Heda was there's other potential opportunities, especially if something went wrong. So she has suggested, and we have discussed, at some point in time, being able to parcel down the mortgage, the lease and so forth, to a smaller piece than what it currently is. So although I put on the lease, I think, you know, the one you might have in the packet says to be determined because we believe we're gonna pare it down. The IRRR is kind of wanting to push this along, and for their funding purposes, they want the whole piece on there with the understanding that we might very well be requesting it be pared down in the future once we've had a surveyor be able to determine what portion is really being used by AMGS versus not. So if you're approving those documents tonight, you're approving them with that qualification to say, per the parcel, with the understanding that there could be an amendment to that in the future.
What is the total size of this property?
It's a roughly 9-acre parcel, and we're building on roughly half.
Okay.
One other note I will state then is, per the lease, there's this mortgage amortization schedule that looks like this, right after the lease. And it has the lease income in there, to Andy's point of how that is written out. So you will notice that starting on 1/1 of 2026, that first year, the rent per square foot is listed, the total square feet of the building is listed, which gives a total monthly rent of that $72.92. But then we added an imputed 3% interest into that particular rent month. And that would be the total monthly income then is $7,510 a month for an annual rental income of $90,125. So the lease addresses that monthly and annual rent in there and assumes this imputed interest rate on top of the $2.50 per square foot. And as you will notice then, if we're going to develop our $250,000 maintenance fund, it will be about April 1st of 2028 before we'll pay rent payment number 1 back to the IRRR on this limited recourse note based on the rent, you know. So that's why this lease is also addressed in the business subsidy agreement, because we are still incubating AMGS in the new building at a $2.50 per square foot rent, because that is not considered market rate for manufacturing space in the city of Hibbing. So this also is part of that business subsidy agreement.
What is market rate for, in the city of Hibbing?
So it depends. We've seen anywhere from $11 to $16 a square foot for certain kinds of businesses. But it kind of is shifting around based on who the owner is and how they're renting it out. But we've seen warehouse space be like $6,000 a month for 20,000 square feet, so that's cheaper than that 11 to 16. But then other spaces where, you know, it's a little bit higher. So we try and keep as much information, you know, that we know around town on that, but when it's a private landlord, we may or may not know the full gamut.
I guess I have a question for Andy here. You talk about paring down the size of the property after he realizes what he needs of use and that. Who would have to agree to that?
Member Kivla, he would have to agree to that because it'd be referenced on the lease. And the IRRR would have to agree to what we're proposing because it's their mortgage.
Okay.
Those would be the two parties that I would say would have to agree to the paring down. The IRRR is clearly aware of it. We made it aware of it because we initially asked them take out the mortgage provision. They declined and won't go ahead with this without the mortgage. So then the suggestion was, can we pare it down? And apparently that might be an option, but they're not agreeing because we don't have a specific, once the site has to be determined and the parking lot and everything, once that's been determined, then we can have a better, Betsy can get a better surveyor in there to say, okay, here's what's left. Will you agree that the mortgage could be rewritten to only reflect that piece? And the lease as well.
So all of those things are pieces that you have to take action on tonight for the disbursements to flow from the $9 million loan, because we haven't incurred the larger billings up to this point, but they're coming. So from the perspective of Heda doesn't necessarily have, all of a big bank account. We're hoping that we can get through this piece. We've been looking at this for a while, talking about the various items, and then this was sent out to you on Friday, so you could start looking through it and address any questions.
And with regard to the business subsidy, along with, as Betsy already pointed out, the lower than market rate rental payment, is the fact that there are grants that came as well, along with this through deed and so forth, and the IRRR. So anything over and above $150,000 grant request requires a business subsidy. So that's why we wrote the business subsidy agreement, recognizing that there are some targets in there. I think that there's representation that AMGS will have 12 new positions as a result of this, as well as retaining their 8 positions that they currently have. And there's a rate in there as well as to how much the hourly rate is expected for employees, I think between $20 and $31 an hour. So those are some of the criteria he needs to meet so that we can report. But it's our obligation, since we're the ones dispersing out the funds, we're the ones who have to have the business subsidy. We have an obligation to report those to the state, which is why we need the public hearing tonight.
I have a question regarding the maintenance fee. So, the lease is what, for 11 years, if I read that correctly? This lease is
10
11,
years for
or
the
10
first
years,
one,
okay.
yep.
So, is $250,000 enough in a maintenance fee for, inflation?
Great question, Member Hoffman-Sockman. To start, we figured $250,000 in the first 10 years with a brand-new building and brand-new systems was probably okay. But duly noted, Sheena and I have talked about the fact that once the roof needs to be replaced or some of those larger, like a parking lot resurface, et cetera, that at those points, $250,000 probably will not be enough. So at the next go-round, we probably will have to renegotiate a larger amount. But this allowed him to start paying back the loan through Heda to the IRRR within the first couple of years. If we created a $500,000, he probably wouldn't be paying it back until maybe year 4 or 5. So we were trying to strike a balance between being able to send net rents back to the IRRR and start decreasing that loan value while also creating a fund. Because in our current limited recourse loan that we have with the IRRR for the Vidovec building in North Hibbing, we've seen that we needed that fund with that building. However, that building is older than this, building will be, so trying to strike that balance between the two.
No, that's good, and I like that you're going to, revisit that at the thing. So, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
And as far as him repaying this, he obviously is gonna pay Heda, and then Heda reimburses the IRRR. So, God forbid, if he fails to pay, or if something happens where he doesn't make these payments, it would be up to Heda then to go after him to get these payments up to date.
Correct. In the same fashion as we worked with our prior tenants in the Vidovec building, where we did face that situation, right? A prior tenant did not stay very current with things. This is now a triple net lease. They are responsible for their own utilities, their own property taxes, and their own cleaning and light maintenance of things, which is spelled out in the lease. And we pay them through net rents. So the IRRR is not, as Attorney Borland mentioned, going to come after Heda while we have a tenant in there, to pay them back as long as the conditions of the note and the lease are still being maintained, building that $250,000 fund balance, et cetera. However, at some point, if we are collecting rents, or we have a tenant that's just in there not paying us rents, then yes, that would be up to us to go after the due diligence to either make them get to right with their rents or else, evict the tenant.
Thank you.
Which is why they see the lease and agree to the amounts and things.
And he is able to sublease that as well.
I believe in the
Yes.
lease and such, it wasn't precluded.
But it requires our approval.
Excellent. Any other questions before we do the public hearing for the business subsidy and the lease, et cetera? And so you'll notice in the board reports that the lease is first and then the business subsidy is second, because the business subsidy requires the lease to be approved, and then the limited recourse note is third. All right, excellent. Well, Madam President, I hand the meeting back over to you then to go into that next section.
Okay, and our next session is the public hearing, the first open public hearing. So I now open the public hearing on the business subsidy agreement between AMGS and Heda. Does anyone wish to address the board with respect to this proposed agreement? Does anyone wish to address the board with respect to this proposed agreement? Does anyone wish to address the board with respect to this proposed agreement? Okay, we've called 3 times. At the end, ask for a motion to close the public hearing. Can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to close public hearing.
Motion made by Member Hyduk,
I'll second that.
supported by Member Kivela. Is there any further discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, then we can move on to the board reports.
Excellent, Madam
Number
Chair.
1.
Members of the board, in front of you then tonight is a request to approve the AMGS lease between the Hibbing Economic Development Authority and Advanced Machine Guarding Systems.
Do we have a motion to
Yes.
approve this AMGS?
Yes, Madam President, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion made by Member Hoffman-Sokoman,
Support?
supported by Vice President Drainus. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. On to B.
The second item in front of you tonight is a request to approve the business subsidy agreement with Advanced Machine Guarding Systems for the expansion project at, I can't remember what the exact address is, but it's on 13th Street.
Do we have a motion to approve the business subsidy agreement that we have just discussed?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the business subsidy agreement.
Motion made by Mayor Hyduk,
Support?
support by Mike, support by Member Egan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. On to C.
Excellent. The final item then is resolution number 2024-10-08,
08.
all right? Which is a resolution authorizing the approval and execution of documents associated with the limited recourse loan agreement with the IRRR and AMGS property.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve that limited recourse loan with
So moved.
IRRR? Moved by Member Egan. Supported by Member Hoffman-Sokoman. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, that should be it for our Community Development Director. Awesome. now we can move on to number 2. And that would be Sheena Molnar.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I handed out an updated loan balance schedule as of today for all of you to review. Just a few things I want to note on the schedule tonight. We did receive our first payment on our judgment that was sent to RCB from Rock and Rollers. So that came off the loan balance. We did have quite a few loans that were paid off in this last draft. Sullivan Candy Micro Mart was paid off. 24 properties sold the property to Heartwood, so at that closing, that loan was paid off. Moxie did make a payment through August, so that's still behind, but we did receive another payment. North Star Dental, that loan was paid off. Lundquist Renew Health, that one was also paid off. Eagle Eye Properties, that was paid off. As I said, Heartwood, that loan closed in October, so now they own the building. And then I do want to note that we've been trying to contact Arrowhead Motorcycle because we had the ACH was returned for the October draft. We have not successfully gotten a hold of her yet, but we'll continue to try to touch base with her on that loan. If you flip the schedule to the back side, one of our 420 loans in that fund was paid off. That was Rich and Sherry Lee's loan at 1810 East 3rd Avenue. And then Rich and Sherry were in this afternoon to sign and get their loan for the Andrew Mason building for the deferred loan. They said that the roof and systems are complete, and then that they also were near or complete on the depot building as well. So that'll be drawn on the next check run for the $70,000 on that one. So we have fund cash balances as of October 21st, as of today, between the 3 funds of $1,268,762. We have $191,000 still that are outstanding that people still have to submit project invoices for, giving a balance to lend of just over $1 million. Does anyone have any questions for me?
I don't think I ever remember a time where so many loans were paid off. It's wonderful. It's great.
That's fine.
Yes, there was a lot of them that had one payment left all at the same time, but it's nice to see them done.
Wonderful.
Looks very good. Does anybody else have any questions for Sheena regarding the loans? Okay, so we are finished, and it looks like we've come to the end of what we have on schedule for tonight, so we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made by Kivela, seconded by Mayor Hyduk. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.